Good evening. This is Jacob Ladd, and this is how I would be running my private correctional facility. The industrial prison complex is a system situated at the intersection of government and private interests. It uses prisons as a solution to social, political, and economic problems. It includes human rights violations, the death penalty, slave labor, policing, courts, the media, political prisoners, and the elimination of dissent. Health, such as toilet sanitation and cooking facilities, become inadequate to serve a growing prison population. The health of staff and inmates is a risk, making it more difficult to control contagious diseases or infections that might be spread throughout the jail or surrounding areas. Most jails are unsanitary. Certain health conditions in prisons are more difficult to manage humanely and effectively. As need for living space increases, the space available for education, recreational, culture, and religious activities is often reduced or entirely eliminated. So there is no more church, there is no more rec center, there is no more activities for inmates to do in these facilities as, prisons grow. And one of the biggest problems I say we have in our prison industrial system today is we group people in with large margins and we don't quite decide which prisoners go where. We just group them in. All offenders under this category get grouped into this level. So therefore you have very violent prisoners with non-violent prisoners. I would classify and house prisoners according to their level of risk. Lower risk groups require less security and can be managed on a lower security basis. Now, there are a lot of old practices and techniques that we have in our jail system today that I find obsolete and that we no longer need. There are plenty of old techniques that can be labeled as outdated or, unnecessary or inhumane. And one of the biggest ones is the squat and cough. When you're first integrated into prison in booking, you essentially have to squat and cough to see if anything falls from your rectum. Now, in my jail, I would implement new X-ray body scanners that would allow you to also see straight through a human's body, and you could essentially tell if they are bringing in contraband or something like that. I find that the old practice of squat and cough is humiliating and degrading to a human and strips them of their moral sensibility. My long-term solutions would be to have mobile judges that could travel to the prisons for hearings so we could get people in and out quicker. The judge would be able to use probation and community service as an effective alternative to prison, so we could give back to the communities where these offenders offend and violate people. Parole boards would be given authority to release supervised prisoners early who pose little danger. There's no sense in locking a man up or keeping a man behind bars for stealing a candy bar in the 1960s. It's just unethical. Security in prisons range very, very fluctuate. You see in the more dangerous parts of the jail, they have more security. And in the lighter parts of the jail, they don't have as much security, which doesn't mean, that crime goes on. If anything, crime happens more in the less monitored areas, like what they would call, gen pop or anything like that. So if we could have, more even and more focused security, then I feel like we could challenge or we could conquer a lot of the problems that they have. Another big thing I would like to mention is the idleness. The idleness in prisons essentially leads to hostile activity, stress. So we'd have to reduce idleness in prisons, or in my prison at least, by increasing opportunities for exercise, sports, cultural, and religious activities. Active inmates are, less likely to be stressed and hostile. It's studies have been done and it's been proven. Another thing to cut down costs so we can have more effectiveness and rehabilitation in jail, we could improve sanitation and food growth. For one, we could grow our own foods, or we could essentially ward off a certain group of the population of the jail who would like to engage in agriculture after release or probably before release, so they could learn something new. They could become more dependable for themselves and dependable for the prison. This would save thousands, if not more, just on groceries and expenses. Non-sentence prisoners overcrowding is sometimes caused by slow court systems as a result of the number of remand or non-sentence prisoners increase substantially. Some non-sentence prisoners may not have appeared in court due to lack of legal representation, and other may be eligible for bail. Now, for sentenced prisoners, many people or persons who have been sentenced to prison do not represent a real danger or threat to the community. The court has ordered them imprisoned because few other meaningful alternatives for punishment exist. Now, if we could grapple that problem with other means or other alternatives as far as punishing or dealing out punishment to offenders than jail time, we could find that as a way more reputable source. Review cases and speed release. Now, essentially, my speed release organized volunteered lawyers or paralegal volunteers to help inmates prepare for bail hearings and thus reduce the amount of time they may have to wait for their cases to be heard. For many prisons for my prison, we would convene a meeting with judges, politicians, community leaders, lawyers, and other relevant groups to discuss the use of alternative community-based punishments rather than prison for non-dangerous offenders. There's no reason someone should have to spend 90 days in jail for contempt because they can't pay a ticket or anything like that. There has to be other means, or, there's always legal obstacles, but permit trustworthy prisoners to leave during the day or the weekend for employment or family visitation, just so we could have a means to an end as far as keeping people idle but not docile. So essentially a catch-22 effect where you behave, you engage, or you show serious rehabilitation, you should be rewarded. The use of volunteered and trained staff. Now, in a lot of these prisons, it doesn't take much to become a guard or a CO, as they call them. And 9 times out of 10, they're just untrained kids or people, and they walk into these facilities and they treat people how they want to be treated on the street. You can't necessarily do that. Some of these people, I truly believe, have mental issues. Now, a lot of people in jail, they group minorities, especially that might have mental trauma or mental illness, and they throw them in general population. These are not sane people, and these people are seen as a threat and are very well a threat. So if we have trained staff who are able to identify these threats early on at hand, then we could take the preemptive measures to make sure that doesn't happen again.